Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. Missouri Republicans held their annual Lincoln Days gathering in Kansas City over the weekend. The idea to whip up party morale and enthusiasm for this year's elections. Political reporter Jo Mannies was with the party faithful in Kansas City, and she joins me in studio.
Yeah,
welcome back, Jo.
Yeah, thanks.
You just telling us you had a fun trip back from Kansas City.
Yeah, the snow was pretty bad, but hey, I'm here.
Yes, you are. We're grateful to have you here. I get the impression, reading what you've posted and other things, that the Republicans feel fairly optimistic, and at least evidence that in Kansas City.
Yeah, I mean, there is some private concern about different things in different races, but many of them feel that they've gone over the hump. They really think that that the tax cut bill, which is now law, is going to help them, particularly with their base. Todd Graves, who's a lawyer and former U.S. attorney from Kansas City, who's now state GOP party chairman, said that he thought it was providing some energy among the base that they hadn't had, because they feel they have to have their base energized to show up in these midterms or they're toast. Usually Republicans, as a rule, are more reliable to get to the polls than Democrats as far as in off years. This year, at least initially, has been shaping up to be very different. But Missouri Republicans, I can say, they're almost unanimous. I mean, Blunt is confident. He's doing some stuff in southwest Missouri today. This is Senator Roy Blunt. He's confident that that the tax cut bill is selling, and that people are seeing a little bit more in their paycheck, and that they're going to credit the Republicans for it. Now, there's always a danger there. Depends on how Democrats counter that. I mean, McCaskill, in a press call last week, was saying, well, they're going to get a little bit, but wealthier people are getting more. And it's whether or not the Democrats keep hammering that, or if they back off. Democrats often aren't as good as getting a message and sticking to it. Republicans are really good at that.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to me because, I mean, that message about the tax cuts was everywhere. I mean, and I think that's one of the reasons Governor Eric Greitens is pushing for more state tax cuts, even though there are concerns within his own party about whether or not it hurts the state's bottom line. But I think politically, there's some who think they need to do it.
It seems to be working on that national level. Donald Trump's poll favorability ranking has gone up close to 40% now, and they must be very happy to see that happening.
Yeah, now whether or not it stays,
yeah.
Who knows? I mean, because it gets overshadowed by stuff. Because unfortunately in Washington, there's hot news about every 5 minutes. But yeah, it's always interesting to go to Lincoln Days if you cover politics or are interested in politics in Missouri. Lincoln Days is like a giant day and a half. It's not a party so much; it's just a junkie's, dream. Mm-hmm. And because everybody's there, they all have these forums. This year was a little different. Okay, first, the governor, whoever is governor, controls his party. And Greitens, the state GOP staff, had opted to close a lot of these sessions, which it still mystifies me. I had state reps who were coming up to me, couldn't figure it out because they were on these panels and they wanted to talk about stuff, and no reporters were allowed in to hear them.
That was very surprising to read. And, all the talk about transparency that we've been hearing for the last year and a half or so, transparency is not very visible.
Yeah, and I complained about that. And it's not about me. I mean, the point is that I think if you're a Republican, you want your message out of what you're trying to say. Mm-hmm. And there was limited opportunity for that within the forums. Now, everybody's wandering around the halls, and they were very receptive. I mean, talking to me. So I have lots of audio of different people talking about different things. But generally, they're hinging on this tax cut, helping to boost their momentum and maybe make this fall not so bad. They think that's probably key in their effort to try to defeat U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill, who is the number one target of the state party and arguably the national party as well.
Well, however, we must get to some things that could be hurting the Republicans this year, and first and foremost in that is the Governor Greitens situation with that sex scandal that has received so much attention, at least until quite recently.
Yeah, and it's funny because nobody really talked about it. The forums that were open, the way they were set up, there was really no candid questions from the floor. I mean, and previously, this was my 28th Lincoln Days, okay? So every one, there's always been this forum on Saturday morning. This year, they did it different. But people would ask, these were just average people who are Republicans, and they would ask anything. And it could be pretty pointed. And usually you had all the office holders, most of the Congress people, all there on stage, fielding all these questions. That did not happen. I mean, this time everything that was open to the press was pretty orchestrated. But Party Chairman Graves did talk to me about this, and he claims that he thinks they're over the hump and that that's now old news. Sheena Greitens was there for a rally that the governor had for himself Saturday afternoon. She didn't talk to the press, but she was there. So that was actually news. Now, I didn't see her before or after, but as I said, for the most part, you didn't see the governor. He was there, but he wasn't doing that many public events.
So nobody is behind the scenes whispering that this is going to really hurt us in the fall, that we're over the hump.
Yeah, that's kind of the message. I think as long as there's nothing new, I mean, because the news changes every 5 minutes, not just in Washington, but here. Yeah. Missouri Attorney General Josh Hawley, who's been under fire for some of his comments that he made in December, but that were made public last week about, his views about who's responsible for the rise in sex trafficking.
He blames the sexual revolution of the 60s and early 70s.
Yes, he does. And I give him a lot of credit as a reporter in that I did get to talk to him at length about this. And I used some in a news spot today, and online, but I'll have some more later. He does believe that. He believes that has helped create this climate. He says men are mainly to blame. And so he says this is different than talking like what Todd Aiken talked about as far as legitimate rape and all that. I mean, and Hawley claims that McCaskill and her allies are focusing on his comments only because they want to change the subject from the tax cuts.
I've seen it referred to as Aiken moment, ? These comments that he made.
Well, he's claiming that it's not.
Yeah.
And, he's saying that all you got to do is just see how things are playing out in the culture. I mean, he's a socially conservative person. And but he did talk at length about, he wanted to make sure that people understood. He didn't mention it in his public comments, but I mean, it's just said when I interviewed him, and I, give him a lot of credit for that. He took all the questions about it and went on at length about why he feels that to some extent is true, and he says that, Hollywood and the media are to blame for some of this, while acknowledging that sex trafficking has been a problem for thousands of years. But in the age of the internet and movies and all this other stuff, he's claiming it the last 50 years it's changed.
But in the midst of all of this, we're starting to hear through this weekend that Ann Wagner, 2nd District Congresswoman, may be reconsidering a run for the U.S. Senate. She decided last year not to, but may be reconsidering.
Well, I talked to a number of people about that. I know her fairly well. And while she was not there, in fact, only one Republican member of Congress aside from Blunt was there because they were all at this retreat in Virginia. What I've been told from pretty good sources there who are close to her is that, yeah, she's looking at it. She's talked to a few people about it, but that it's probably not serious unless. They said the difference would be if Mitch McConnell, who's the Senate head of the Senate Republicans, if he goes to her. But this would be similar to Schumer, the Democratic head, when he went to McCaskill 12 years ago and told, this is before she ran in 2006 and talked her into running. So I think what I've been told is that unless that happens, she's just going to stand back because most of the donors, I mean, she didn't raise that much money. She has a significant amount of money in the bank, over $3 million, which gives her a head start. But she didn't raise that much this last 3 months because she was focusing on re-election, not trying to fatten her bank account for a Senate bid.
But the Attorney General doesn't have a whole lot in his account either, does he?
No, he only has about $1.2 million. He raised just under $1 million. Now, as his people point out, while that's only a third of what McCaskill raised during the last 3 months, it was more than any other Republican challenger to a Democratic Senate incumbent in the country. So they feel like that's been overlooked. And in fairness, frankly, in this age of outside spending, there was an outside group that announced that they had $2 million already to help him. That came out last week, and so there's so many outside groups that are going to be pouring so much money in on behalf of both him and McCaskill that some of that the Republicans privately are pretty confident that it will balance out. But still, if his own war chest is a lot smaller, that's less money that he personally can't control. He can't control what these outside groups do. And so there is some concern. But they're not panicking.
Which would be the better race in your mind as someone who would be covering, no matter who the candidate is, McCaskill-Wagner or McCaskill-Hawley?
Well, they'd be very different.
Oh, yeah.
I think McCaskill-Hawley, you're going to see a lot of focus on the Republican base, the social conservative base. Hawley has a major social conservative following. I mean, he was one of the lawyers in the Hobby Lobby case about, which resulted in the Supreme Court ruling that companies can decide that they don't want to cover contraception in their insurance. With Wagner and McCaskill, be very different because you have, two women, two pros. I mean, Hawley is just in his first office right now, so he's running for another. Wagner is a political veteran. She's been involved in politics for 30 years, more than 30 years, and so she takes a totally different view of this. I mean, and she has been a well-known, strong fundraiser for years. So, and it would change the dynamics if you have two women candidates. So I think, but whether or not she can energize some of the base like Hawley can is unclear. I mean, she may do better with suburban Republican women than he does. I mean, I'm just speculating, and this is 10 months out. Because suburban Republican women, I mean, I really believe if you look at the totals in 2012, they made a big difference in the McCaskill-Aiken race.
Who do you think McCaskill would prefer to run against? I mean, we're just talking here. We don't obviously know anything. It's just kind of a speculation.
I don't know, because I think she could see it different ways. I think in some ways she probably would prefer Hawley. But at the same time, as I said, he was the top vote getter in Missouri in 2016. So some people warn against underestimating how strong Hawley would do.
This is where I am in this. Some of the other candidates who have surfaced in this race, I'm not even that familiar with their names, but we have Tony Minetti. He was there at the at Lincoln Days.
Yeah, I talked to him.
And Austin Peterson, the Libertarian. The Republican is Tony Minetti. The Libertarian is Austin Peterson.
Well, Austin Peterson's a former Libertarian. He's now running as a Republican for the Senate. I want to make that clear.
What about Cortland Sykes? He's been getting some publicity.
Well, he was floating around a little bit Saturday afternoon, and I saw him. I was supposed to interview him, but then he disappeared. But he has gotten a lot of national attention. But frankly, if you look, he hasn't raised that much. He doesn't have that much in the bank. I mean, he is so far behind. Of all the Republican Senate candidates, he has by far the smallest bank account. He was not at Lincoln Days spending a lot of time there, really trying to reach out to donors or party activists, which for both parties, that's what these events are for. So he was just there for a short time, Saturday afternoon, early evening. So while he's got a lot of attention, and I've been around long enough that I've seen that attention can sometimes translate into votes because it helps them with name recognition, I'll have to wait to see who actually files and whether or not the money raising gets better. Because while you don't have to raise the most money to win, if you don't have some for some ads, you have such a disadvantage.
Time's winding down. Much discussion about the memo that got so much attention last week, or the Mueller investigation?
Actually, only a little bit. Saturday morning, I talked to, as I said, Senator Blunt and Hawley at length about it, especially Blunt. And Blunt underscored that while he opposes any effort for Congress to pass some sort of law or bill that would bar the president from firing Mueller, Blunt believes that the president does have the right to fire Mueller. But Blunt emphasized, he said, I think it would be a big mistake if he fired Mueller, and I have told him that. And he said the president knows how I feel. So I thought that was rather interesting.
They've got to have their eyes on what's going on in Washington, needless to say. The impact would be so broad.
Yes. And Blunt is one of the more powerful Republican senators in the country. People don't always recognize that, but he is. Jo Mannies, welcome home again from your weekend in Kansas City. Good to have you with us, and thank you for being with us. Well, thanks for asking me.
Always good to see you. Archive versions of past St. Louis On the Air programs are available for download or podcast at stlpublicradio.org/STLonair. St. Louis On the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio 90.7 KWMU. Thank you for listening. I'm Don Marsh.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.